Before the gunshots, before the 911 call, before the facts that left police and reporters stunned, there was just a house on McFarland Avenue in Wilmington, California. 2 stories. Beige stucco. A plastic playset in the yard. Bikes in the driveway. Neighbors said you could always hear kids laughing there. Inside that house lived 7 people. The father, 40-year-old Irvin Lupo. The mother, 40-year-old Anna Lupo. Their children, Brittany, 8 years old. Twin girls, Jasmine and Jassily, 5 years old. And the youngest, twin boys, Benjamin and Christian, just 2 years old. 5 kids under the age of 9. 5. Neighbors said the children were outside all the time, riding their wagon, dragging stuffed animals into the driveway, waving at people walking past. They were happy. They had birthday parties. That's how people described it later. The Lupo house looked like a house where life was happening. From the outside, Irvin and Anna looked like a couple doing everything right. They both worked in healthcare. He was an X-ray tech. She was a medical technician. They worked at Kaiser Permanente West Los Angeles Medical Center, and they'd been there for years. They weren't celebrities. They weren't rich, but they had what a lot of people wanted: steady jobs with benefits, and a home they owned. They had, by all appearances, built a stable life. They had even added on. Investigators later said the Lupos had recently remodeled the house. A new master bedroom, a new bathroom, new kitchen appliances, including an industrial-style refrigerator. You don't remodel like that if you're about to walk away from your future. You remodel like that because you believe you still have one. But there was something else happening inside that home that neighbors couldn't see. At the start of 2009, things began to crack. To understand what's about to happen, you have to remember what early 2009 was in places like Los Angeles. The economy had dropped off a cliff. Layoffs were everywhere. People with safe jobs were suddenly not safe. And it wasn't just money fear, it was identity fear. Men who had built their sense of worth around "I take care of my family" were getting knocked flat fast. That matters here. In January 2009, Irvin and Anna were both terminated from their jobs at Kaiser. The hospital later said they were fired after an internal investigation. The accusation was that they had lied about their income on child care assistance paperwork. The allegation was this: the couple was making good hourly wages in radiology, but they reported dramatically lower income to qualify for subsidized child care through a nonprofit program. In healthcare, paperwork is everything. Records are trust. Kaiser said falsifying records like that wasn't some little HR issue. It was grounds for immediate termination. Suddenly, in the same week, both parents were out of work. Now pause there. If you strip everything else away from this story and just leave that, it sounds like a stressful but survivable blow. It's awful, yes. Embarrassing, yes. Terrifying, yes. But people lose jobs. People find other jobs. People get behind on a mortgage and then catch up. That's normal hardship. People don't usually respond to hardship by destroying their entire family. But that's where the fracture opens in this case, because Irvin didn't just lose income. He lost control of the story of himself. He wrote about it. He couldn't stop writing about it. In the days leading up to the murders, Irvin sat down and typed out a long letter. Then he printed it. Then he signed it. Then he faxed it. Not to a lawyer, not to a pastor, not to a family member, to a TV news station. Let that sink in. He created his own narrative and sent it to the media like it was a press release. In this letter, he laid out his version: that he and his wife had been mistreated at work, that management humiliated them, that someone told him he should have blown his brains out. Kaiser later said nobody told him that. But whether it happened or not almost doesn't matter here. What matters is that he was building a case in his head, a justification, a track record. He wanted the world to understand him not as a killer, but as a victim pushed to the edge. He claimed in that letter that after everything they'd been through, his wife, Anna, was the one who said the unthinkable, that it would be better if the whole family died together. And, in his exact twisted logic, why leave the children in someone else's hands? Police would later say they do not believe that was her idea. They believe that was his. That one sentence is a window into how he thought. He wasn't saying, "I love my kids so much I can't live without them." He was saying, "If I can't stay in control of my family, then nobody else will raise them." Listen to what that really is. That's not love. That's possession. Around the same time he was writing this letter and planning how it would be seen, he started quietly cutting his children out of the world. He went to the school and pulled the older kids out. He told the principal the family was moving to Kansas. He didn't say, "We're going through something dangerous," or "Please keep an eye on us," or "The kids might need help." He just said, "We're leaving." Calm, polite, done. He also began staging what looked like a real move. Investigators later said he told relatives they were heading to Kansas. He packed the SUV. He made it sound like they were already on the road to a new life. On the surface, that sounds like hope. We're getting out, starting over. But if you zoom in, it wasn't hope, it was theater. It was a cover story to explain why no one would be seeing these kids anymore. Inside the house, tension was tightening. There were money problems, yes. Police found out later the Lupos were about a month behind on their mortgage. A couple of big checks had bounced, including thousands, for property taxes. That's real pressure. But investigators also said this wasn't a situation where the family was hours from being homeless, starving, and living in their car. This wasn't about total physical survival. This was about humiliation and control. It was about pride. And then, late on a Monday night in January 2009, something happened inside that house that nobody on that street heard clearly enough to understand until it was too late. Neighbors said they heard noises that sounded like little pops, firecrackers. Nothing dramatic. There was no screaming in the street, no shattering glass, no one running out of the house yelling for help. Wilmington is loud. People shrug off sounds all the time. But those pops were not fireworks. Those were gunshots. By the next morning, Tuesday, January 27, 2009, it was already done. Irvin faxed his letter to the TV station that morning. It wasn't a last-second meltdown. It was calmly written, structured, dated, signed. He also made a phone call to police saying something like, "I just came home and my whole family's been shot." He tried to play the role of shocked husband discovering a crime scene. At almost the exact same time, the TV station called LAPD and said, "We just got a fax from a man saying he killed his wife and 5 kids, and here's the address." That timing told LAPD everything. This wasn't a break-in by a stranger. This wasn't a robbery gone bad. This wasn't a mystery intruder. Police raced to the 2-story house on McFarland Avenue. They walked in and immediately smelled gunpowder in the air. Fresh. That means it had just happened. Upstairs on one bed, they found Irvin dead from a gunshot wound to the head. Next to him were his 3 daughters, Brittany, 8, and the 5-year-old twins, Jasmine and Jassily, all shot in the head. A revolver was on the bed. In another bedroom, they found Anna. Beside her, the 2 youngest boys, Benjamin and Christian, 2 years old, all 3 shot in the head. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no forced entry. The children weren't running through the house, trying to escape. They were placed. The scene was controlled. Officers and paramedics did what they could do, which at that point was mostly confirm what they already knew. 6 victims, all dead, all killed in their own home. And the 7th body, the killer, right there too. 7 people, an entire family, gone. And this is where the story tries to break your brain. Because on paper, in pictures, in the way people talked about them just days before, this did not look like a murder house. This looked like a normal black middle-class family who had carved out something solid in a city that does not make that easy. 2 medical tech jobs, a 2-story home, 5 kids, a recent remodel, school, birthday parties in the yard. From the street, it was stability. Inside, it was pressure, secrecy, and a man who had already decided that if his version of success ended, everyone in that house would end with it. This is where part 1 ends. A father loses his job. His wife loses hers. He feels humiliated. He removes the kids from school under the lie of moving to Kansas. He writes a long letter blaming his employer and even his wife. He plans the scene. And he makes sure that, in his mind, no one gets to live without him. We're going to slow this down because what happened inside that house in Wilmington was not a sudden snap. It was structured, it was staged, it was narrated by the killer in his own voice. And that matters because later people tried to call this desperate or a tragic act of love. No, it was control. Ugly, total control. Let's start with the letter. On the morning police found the bodies, local news received a fax, multiple pages, typed, signed, calm. It wasn't a scream for help. It wasn't incoherent. It read like a prepared statement. In that letter, Irvin Lupo said he and his wife, Anna, had been unfairly fired from Kaiser Permanente. He said they were humiliated. He said management pushed them to the breaking point. He even claimed someone at the hospital told him to go blow your brains out. The hospital denied anyone said that and still denies it to this day. See what he's doing? Before anyone has even opened the front door of that house, he's already assigning blame to someone else. Then he went even further. He wrote that after everything that had happened, his wife, Anna, supposedly decided that the only answer was for the whole family to die together. He wrote that she didn't want to leave the children in someone else's hands. That line is cold. He was not saying we're afraid for our kids. He was saying if we can't raise them, no one will. That's not protection. That's ownership dressed up as sacrifice. Police would later say they do not believe this was her idea. They believe he pinned it on her to avoid being remembered as the sole architect of the massacre. The letter also included this sentence: "O Lord my God, is there no hope for a widow's son?" That's the language of someone thinking about how his words will sound after he's gone. That's theater. This wasn't a blackout rage. This was presentation. Now, what was happening in the house in the hours around that letter? First, we know Irvin was moving in a very calculated way the day before. He told the kids' school that the family was moving out of state, Kansas. He pulled at least 3 of the children out of class permanently. That's a huge detail. Because it means that in his mind, these kids did not have a future that involved school, friends, or next week. He'd already cut their timeline off. He told relatives that they were relocating to Kansas for a new start. He made it sound like survival, fresh air, lower cost of living, family nearby. It sounded like a normal story. We're leaving LA, getting out, doing what's best for the kids. Only it wasn't a relocation plan. It was an exit cover. He reportedly even packed the SUV with things you'd pack for a long drive out of California. Clothes, supplies, things you'd take if you were crossing states with 5 kids. It was set dressing. Nothing in that car was ever going to Kansas. The kids were never going to Kansas. Then there's the timeline. Neighbors said they heard popping noises late Monday night. They thought it was fireworks. That's what people say all the time when they hear gunshots. You tell yourself it's not what you think it is. Police believe those pops were the first shots. According to investigators, here's what they believe happened. Sometime Monday night, going into very early Tuesday morning, Ervin shot his wife, Anna. He then shot his 5 children. Brittany, 8, the twin girls Yasmin and Jassily, 5, and the twin boys Benjamin and Christian, 2, each at close range, in the head. Police described it later in flat professional language because there's no gentle way to say it, execution style. The kids weren't found all over the house like they ran and he chased them. They weren't found hiding behind furniture. They weren't found halfway down the stairs like they tried to get away. They were placed in beds. Anna was found shot in one bedroom, next to her 2 youngest sons, 2-year-old twins. In another bedroom, on another bed, police found the 3 girls lying with their father. The gun, a revolver, was next to him. He had a gunshot wound to his head. That detail is everything. He didn't just kill his kids. He arranged their bodies next to him, like he wanted the world to walk into that room and see one image: father and daughters together. It is chilling how much that mirrors his letter. The scene in the house and the tone of the letter are doing the same job. They're both trying to sell a story. This is a tragic, all-of-us-together decision. It's staged to look like unity. In reality, it's domination. And it wasn't over yet. After killing his entire family, Ervin did not immediately turn the gun on himself. He was alive long enough to keep working on his narrative. He faxed that letter to a TV station. He wanted it on the record, before anyone else said a word. He wanted the world to hear his voice first. He also called police and pretended to be a witness. He said something along the lines of, "I just came home and my whole family's been shot." He acted like he just walked into a massacre someone else had done. That lie would have been step 1 in a classic mystery intruder story. I left, I came back, everyone's dead. Except he made a mistake. He didn't plan for the fact that the TV station he faxed also called the police at the same time with his exact address saying, "Hey, we just got a fax from this man saying he killed his family." So police knew before they even got to the house that the call and the fax were coming from the same person. That timing is why officers got there so fast. And when they walked inside, they could still smell gunpowder in the air. That tells you this wasn't old, this wasn't overnight, and then sleep. This was fresh. Here's where the horror turns into something else: impact. When the scene was processed and the family was identified, this case did not stay private. It hit the city like a shock wave. Think about what Los Angeles was already seeing around that time. The economy was collapsing. Families everywhere were scared. And then this happens. A father kills his wife and all 5 of his children. Writes a manifesto blaming his job, blames the economy, blames humiliation, and then kills himself. Within hours, there was a conversation starting that honestly scared law enforcement. People started saying, "This is what happens when a good man loses hope." No. Police shut that down hard. Detectives stood in front of microphones and made it very clear, in these tough times, there are other options. That's what they said publicly. That might sound like a generic line, but it wasn't. It was a warning. Why did they say it like that? Because they were terrified of copycats. This wasn't the only case of a man killing his entire family in that era. There had already been other incidents in California where fathers murdered their wives and children after losing jobs, then killed themselves. Investigators were seeing a pattern, and the pattern wasn't financial panic. The pattern was control. Control over the story, control over the kids, control over who gets to live. When police said, "There are other options," what they meant was, do not turn this into some twisted idea of mercy. Do not let anyone think he loved them so much he couldn't leave them. That is not what happened in that house. What happened in that house was this: a man decided that if he couldn't stand the shame of being fired, If he couldn't tolerate the idea of being seen as broke, exposed, or less powerful, then nobody in his family would be allowed to exist without him. That is not love. That is erasure. And you see that in his last phone calls, too. Sometime shortly before police arrived, Irvin called a relative, Anna's brother. According to investigators, he told him, basically, the kids are gone. Anna is gone. I had to do it. I'm going next. He also reportedly asked the relative to take care of certain practical things, like paying an attorney and dealing with belongings. That is not a man in shock. That is a man closing his accounts. So by the time officers got to McFarland Avenue, all that was left to do was confirm the obvious. 6 people inside were dead. The 7th, Irvin, was dead too. Now what? In the hours after, candles and flowers and stuffed animals started piling up outside the Lupo home. People in the neighborhood were crying in the street. There were vigils. There were prayers. There were questions no one could answer. Neighbors said the thing people always say after a familicide: they seemed fine. No one said he was violent. No one said we heard screaming every night. No one said we saw this coming. What people said was they had 5 kids, and they seemed like they loved those kids. That is part of why this case is so disturbing. It did not look like a horror house. It looked like a normal family trying to survive in a bad economy. But here's the truth you have to sit with, or else this story becomes dangerous. He did not snap. He did not lose control. He took control. He removed the kids from school. He told a relocation lie. He staged a fake move out of state. He wrote a long letter to shape public opinion. He blamed his employer. He blamed the system. He even tried to blame his wife. Then he killed his entire family. Then he tried to control the first words police would hear. That is planning. That is intent. That is ownership. That is not mercy. The crime scene was cleared. The bodies were removed. The house on McFarland Avenue was sealed and taped. And then the next battle started. It wasn't just an investigation now. It was a fight over the story. Because the story you tell about a massacre like this isn't just words. It's damage. It spreads. Other people hear it. Some of them are already unstable. Some of them are already thinking, if I go down, I'm taking everyone with me. Police knew that. That's why, within hours, detectives went in front of cameras and said something you almost never hear at a crime scene. They didn't lead with thoughts and prayers or, we ask for privacy. They said very directly, we are in a hard economy right now, but in hard times, there are other options. You don't do this. They were not talking to the public out of politeness. They were talking to a very specific kind of man. Because this wasn't the only familicide in Southern California around that time. In the months on either side of the Lupo murders, there were other cases where a father killed his wife and children after losing a job, then killed himself. Detectives were already watching this pattern, and they were scared. In each case, the killer tried to rewrite what happened into a "we couldn't go on" story, instead of what it actually was. I refuse to let them go on without me. That detail is the center of this case. It's not unemployment. It's not bills. It's ownership. After the murders, there was immediate coverage. You can imagine what that day was like in Los Angeles media. A father, a mother, 5 children, all dead in one house. You cannot not cover that. But the question was, how do you cover it? Because sitting in every newsroom was a fax. That fax was written by the killer himself. And it is very, very dangerous when the murderer hands you his version of the truth, already packaged, already emotionally loaded. This is what the fax said. In essence, we were a good family. We worked hard. We were humiliated. We got fired unfairly. Someone told me I should blow my brains out. My wife and I decided we couldn't go on. We couldn't leave the children with strangers. So we chose to die together. Do you hear what that is doing? It is asking for sympathy, spreading guilt to his wife so he doesn't stand alone, framing mass murder as a loving choice. That is manipulation from beyond the grave. And this is where law enforcement, the hospital, and the surviving relatives all started pushing back. First, the hospital. Kaiser Permanente put out a statement almost immediately after the murders. It did not play along with his story. Kaiser said, yes, both Ervin and Anna were terminated. Yes, it was serious. The issue, according to the hospital, was that the couple had misrepresented their income in order to qualify for subsidized child care, meaning they reported themselves as basically low income when they were not. In plain terms, the hospital said they lied on official documents. So two things can be true at once. Losing your job that way is humiliating and terrifying. And also, it wasn't random. It wasn't a layoff. It wasn't, the cruel system crushed us. Kaiser's message was basically, we didn't target them out of nowhere. There was cause. But even if they felt wronged, that does not explain or justify what happened next. That matters, because in his facts, Ervin wanted the story to be simple. Corporate machine destroys innocent workers. Father has no choice. He wanted to sound like a tragic figure, not like a man who was caught committing fraud and then killed 6 people. Now on the police side, detectives made something else clear. They did not buy his claim that Anna agreed to any of this. In his letter, Ervin wrote that his wife decided it was better if the whole family died together. He used her to make the murders sound like a joint decision, like a pact. Police did not accept that. Investigators said Anna did not write that note. Anna did not fax that note. Anna did not call anyone saying, I'm going to do this. He did. And that's another pattern with familicide, by the way. The killer loves to speak for the dead. We decided, we agreed. We couldn't live without each other. The dead never get to confirm or deny it. After Ervin killed her, he tried to turn Anna into his alibi. Now let's talk about the neighborhood, because what happened in that community is important. Wilmington is working class. It's families stacked on families in tight streets near the port. People there are used to noise, police lights, stress. But this was different. This wasn't sirens in the distance. This wasn't a drug bust. This was a father killing his entire family while everyone on the block was home. People showed up with candles, teddy bears, flowers, balloons for the kids. Neighbors cried in front of cameras. It was raw. But it wasn't just grief, it was fear. They were scared of the idea. Because here's what hits you when you live next door to something like this. If that family, with the bikes, with the plastic play kitchen in the yard, with the 5 kids always riding around smiling, if that family can end like this, then how do you trust what you think you know about any house on your block? That's a psychological earthquake. And for parents especially, it was worse. People looked at their own kids and thought, would I even know if my partner was capable of this? Even the kids in the neighborhood felt it. They saw police tape around a house where they were just playing the week before. That doesn't go away. That lives in you. Now here's something most people don't talk about with this case, but it needs to be said clearly. This was not about money. It used money as the excuse. Because yes, the Lupos were behind. They were 1 month late on the mortgage. They had bounced a check for property taxes. Losing 2 incomes at once is brutal. No one's saying that's not real. But the investigators said something that a lot of people missed. The family was not at the point of, we're sleeping in the car tonight. They were not on the sidewalk with trash bags. This was not absolute survival mode. This was about shame. For some men, provider isn't just a job. It's their identity. And the moment that identity gets cracked, especially publicly, something sick can happen. Instead of thinking, how do I get help? Or how do I rebuild? They start thinking, how do I make sure nobody else gets to move on without me? In other words, if I lose everything, I take everything. That mindset is exactly what terrifies domestic violence experts because it shows up over and over in family annihilations. The motive is dressed up as love or mercy, but if you listen closely, it's all about power. If I can't control this family anymore, then this family doesn't get to exist. That is what happened in Wilmington. We also have to sit with how intentional it was. He pulled the children out of school and said, "We're moving to Kansas." He called relatives and said, "We're leaving California." He packed the car like they were going on a cross-country drive. He staged it. He prepped the excuse. He decided the kids would not live in a world where he wasn't standing there as the father. Then, he lined them up by age in 2 bedrooms, shot them in the head, placed their bodies, wrote a manifesto blaming everyone else, and killed himself next to his daughters like he wanted that to be the image burned into people's minds. That is not someone breaking in panic. That is someone controlling the ending. And then we get to maybe the ugliest question of them all. How do you talk about the kids? Because the media at first did what media always does. They said their names, their ages, they showed their school photos, sweet faces, little matching outfits, missing teeth. You've seen those images 100 times in other cases. The angel montage. But that puts the focus on tragedy, not agency. These kids weren't just angels. They were real human beings who had futures. Brittany was 8. That's 3rd grade. 3rd grade is not a baby. 3rd grade is full personality, full attitude, full opinions. She might have been the one who helped with the twins. She might have already had a favorite song, a favorite teacher, a best friend she sat with at lunch every single day. The 5-year-old twins, Jasmine and Jassily, were at that age where twins start to split identities. That's the year when we turns into I. That was stolen from them. The twin boys, Benjamin and Christian, were 2. At that age, you're just learning sentences. You run everywhere. You climb everything. You're chaos with dimples. They were never even given the chance to become annoying teenagers. They were erased before they had a shot. When you understand that, you also understand why police were so blunt afterward. They were trying to slam the door shut on the "he loved them so much" narrative. Because there is a very dangerous story that sometimes comes out of cases like this. The father just couldn't bear to leave them. No, he could have left. He chose not to. He chose not to let them live. That brings us to the next wave: policy and pattern. After the Lupo murders, there were very public conversations in Los Angeles about stress, money, job loss, and men who were spiraling. But the real conversation behind that was this: where are the warning signs? Who is supposed to catch this before it happens? Because here's the most chilling piece of part 3. Nobody saw it coming, not school, not neighbors, not relatives, not even the brother-in-law he called. He didn't rage in public. He didn't threaten in public. He didn't wave a gun in the driveway. He stayed calm. He handled it like logistics. That's the nightmare. We're going to say something most people don't want to hear. What happened in the Lupo house is not rare. It's not common, thank God. But it's also not some freak, never seen before psychological meteor that nobody could have predicted. There's a name for it. There's research on it. There's a pattern. It's called familicide. Familicide is when one parent kills the entire family. Kids, partner, sometimes themselves. Usually in one event, usually inside the home. The person who does it is almost always the father. The victims are almost always the wife or partner and the children. And the reason the killer gives is almost always a lie. People want to believe the story, "We all couldn't go on." They want to believe it was pain or depression or desperation. That maybe this was mercy in a twisted way. But when these cases get studied, when you strip away what the killer said and just look at behavior, the same ugly engine keeps showing up. Control, not sadness. Control. Control over money. Control over the partner. Control over the children's futures. Control over how the story will be told after the killer is gone. That is exactly what you saw with Irvin Lupo. Let's map it. Step 1. Image. He had an identity. The provider. The dad of 5. The homeowner. The guy who had a job in healthcare. He and his wife both worked at a respected medical center. That wasn't just income. That was status. That was, we're not like other struggling families. When that fell apart and both of them were fired, he didn't just lose money, he lost that identity. Losing identity is dangerous for someone whose self-worth is built on being in charge. If "I'm the head of this family" is the only story you believe about yourself, then the second you can no longer say that with your chest, you're not just embarrassed, you feel erased. And if you are the kind of man who cannot emotionally tolerate being erased, you might try to erase everybody else first. Step 2. Isolation. He quietly pulled the kids from school. He told the school they were moving to Kansas. He cut them off from teachers, from classmates, from all the normal adults who might see stress and ask questions. Why is Brittany acting different? Why are the twins sad? Why are they tired? Why do they have bruises? Why are they scared? If those kids don't show up to class, no one can ask. He also told relatives they were leaving California. He made it sound like the family was about to physically disappear in a normal, explainable way. New start, different state. That meant that if those relatives didn't hear from the kids again, it wouldn't immediately scream danger. It would just sound like, "Oh, they must have gotten settled. They're busy. They'll call soon." That is calculated. That is pre-cover. Step 3, narrative, the letter. The fax wasn't a panic note. The fax was PR. He wrote his villain as the system. He wrote himself as tragic, noble, hunted. He wrote his wife as co-signer. He tried to turn murder into a group decision. That's not despair. That's spin. Even the dramatic religious line at the end. That wasn't for Anna or for the kids. That was for the audience. He knew this was going to be read on air, quoted in print, repeated. He was sculpting his legacy. Step 4, positioning. Look at how the bodies were found. The mother and the toddler boys together. The father and the 3 daughters together. There's so much message there. It's staged like, "We died as a family." It's staged like, "We're still together." It's staged like, "No one was abandoned." That visual is the physical version of the letter. He didn't just kill them. He arranged them into a final photo. That's not a suicide scene. That's presentation. Step 5, erasure. This is the part people hate to admit, because it forces the truth to sit in your stomach. He did not kill them because he loved them too much. He killed them because he refused to let them exist without him. That's familicide. The motive is ownership. He's saying, if I can't control the ending, no one gets an ending. And that's why police were so direct when they talked to the public afterward. They were trying to hit that lie with a hammer before it spread. Because this is contagious. That is the scariest part. When one high-profile familicide hits the news and is framed like a desperate father saw no way out, more men in similar spirals see it and think, "Oh, that's an option." We've seen it. City after city, country after country. When the story is told as tragic and noble, it gets copied. When the story is told as selfish and monstrous, it doesn't spread as easily. That's why wording is not just wording, it is prevention. After the Lupo murders, LA law enforcement, child advocates, and crisis counselors pushed a message on purpose. The message was basically, being broke is not a reason to kill your kids. Losing your job is not a reason to kill your partner. Your shame is not bigger than your family's right to live. They had to say it that bluntly, because at the time, California had just been hit with multiple, annihilate the whole family cases linked to job loss, foreclosure, and money stress. The danger wasn't just, will this happen again? The danger was, will this become a script? Now here's the next painful thing. People asked, could this have been prevented? The honest answer is ugly. Probably not, once it reached the final 24 hours. Why? Because from the outside, he looked calm. He wasn't screaming in the street. He wasn't holding anyone hostage. He wasn't threatening suicide to police negotiators. He wasn't spiraling publicly. He was planning quietly. He was doing school withdrawals, car packing, narrative building. That reads as responsible dad, if you don't know what it really is. He also was not someone already flagged in the system. He wasn't a guy with 20 police calls for domestic violence. He wasn't the cliché monster that neighbors point at and say, yeah, that guy. We've always worried about him. He and Anna both worked in a hospital. They had 5 kids. They owned property. They had just remodeled. From the curb, that sells as stable. So instead of asking, why didn't anyone stop him in the last 24 hours? The better question is, why do we pretend this kind of man doesn't exist until after he does it? Because familicide offenders are often invisible until the moment they're not. Let's pull it back to the kids for a second, because it's easy, too easy, to lose them in all this talk of motive and profile. Brittany was 8. You remember being 8. That is not a baby. That's a person. That's a kid with opinions, jokes, favorites, stubborn moods. That's a kid who might have rolled her eyes at you already like a teenager. She had a future. She could have grown up, survived this economy, gone to high school, fallen in love for the first time, had her own life. He stole all of that. The twin girls, 5 years old. 5 is huge. 5 is, my teacher said. 5 is, I can do it myself. 5 is kindergarten pride and sparkly shoes and loud singing in the back seat. He ended that, on purpose. The twin boys, 2 years old. That's just pure life. 2-year-olds are kinetic, sticky, loud, exhausting, hilarious. You don't know who a 2-year-old is going to become yet. That's the entire miracle of being 2. He took that mystery and slammed a door on it. And Anna was not just the mom. She was a working professional in the medical field. She was showing up for a career, showing up for 5 kids, showing up for a household that was under enormous pressure. And then her own husband, the person who should have protected her, used the end of her life to blame her for her own murder. Even in death, she didn't get her own voice. He stole that too. So where does this leave us? After the Lupo murders, a few big conversations started happening more openly. 1, mental health and employment shame. Not just, are you depressed, but are you wrapping your entire self-worth around provider in a way that, if that role is taken from you, you become dangerous? That is not the same as standard depression. That's ego collapse mixed with control. 2, warning signs. Not the movie version, not he's screaming and waving a gun in the driveway. The real version. Has he started isolating the family? Is he suddenly pulling kids from routine for no clear reason? Is he talking in we're all going together language? Is he saying things like the kids will never have to suffer or they won't be raised by strangers? Those are not poetic lines. Those are red alarm lights. 3, the narrative. After Wilmington, police and advocates kept repeating this point whenever another family annihilation hit the news. Stop calling it mercy. Stop calling it love. Stop calling it he snapped like it was out of his hands. He didn't snap. He executed. And that is where we are right before the last part of this story. Because part 5 is not just about how this case ended legally. It didn't go to trial, there was no courtroom, the killer is dead. Part 5 is about aftermath, the memorials, the fear that sat in that neighborhood for months, the way people talked to their kids differently. And the question we always end up with in these cases, what do you do with a house where 5 children were murdered by their father? Do you tear it down? Do you sell it to someone new and pretend? Do you leave flowers forever? How do you keep those kids from being reduced to a headline and forgotten? After the bodies were taken out of the house on McFarland Avenue, after the yellow tape came down, after the camera trucks left, the neighborhood did not go back to normal. How could it? For days, people brought candles, stuffed animals, flowers, handwritten notes, little crosses, photos of the kids, and taped them to the front of the Lupo, home. Some people didn't even know the family personally. They still came. They stood on the sidewalk and cried for children they'd only seen riding scooters in the driveway. It wasn't quiet grief either. It was stunned grief. It was, how do I explain this to my own kids, grief. Parents in that neighborhood, and honestly across Los Angeles, started having a conversation they never thought they'd have. If something ever happens to us, you call 911. You run, you scream. You don't stay in the house just because a grown-up tells you to. I don't care if it's family. You run. Think about how dark that is. Imagine sitting down with your 8-year-old after this and trying to teach them softly that family is not always safety. That's what this case did to people. And Wilmington isn't Beverly Hills. It's not the kind of area that national media normally stays in for very long, but for a minute, the entire city was looking at Wilmington. And Wilmington looked right back and said, we're not just a headline. These were real kids. Say their names. That's where this story has to land too. Brittany Lupo, 8 years old. She should have grown up, finished school, become whoever she wanted, irritated her parents as a teenager, laughed about it later, maybe had a family of her own someday. That was taken from her. Yasmin and Jasly Lupo, 5 years old. That's the age where you're just starting to be independent, where you insist on picking your outfit, where you tell everybody, I can do it myself. That future stopped in that house. Benjamin and Christian Lupo, 2 years old. 2. Anyone who's ever been around a 2-year-old knows they are pure energy. Little hurricanes with baby faces. No version of the world exists where a 2-year-old understands what's happening in those last moments. They were never given a chance at anything. Their whole lives were stolen while they were still learning words. And then there's Anna. A lot of the coverage focused on Irvin because he wrote the facts. He sent the narrative. He framed how the world would talk about the massacre. But Anna is the one who did not get to speak. Even after killing her, Irvin tried to control her voice. He wrote that it was her decision. He wrote that she agreed. Police do not buy that. If there is one thing that should be said clearly and permanently about this case, it's this. Do not let her be remembered as the mom who agreed. She was a victim. She was executed in her own home, and then her killer used her name to defend himself. That is another form of violence. After the murders, Kaiser Permanente, the hospital where both Irvin and Anna had worked, publicly expressed grief for the children and for Anna. They said they were heartbroken. They offered counseling to staff. They did not accept any responsibility for what happened. They said essentially, yes, they were fired for serious policy reasons, and even if they felt that was unfair, what happened in that home can never be excused. Meanwhile, law enforcement made a conscious choice in how they talked about the case going forward. They kept repeating a message that sounded cold at first, but it was necessary. This was not love, and this was not a desperate act of a good dad. This was murder. And you know what? That actually matters. Because familicide spreads through story. If the story becomes, "This man couldn't bear to see his family suffer," then the next broken, angry man who feels his life slipping might look at that and go, "Yeah, that's the way out. That's noble." He'll feel validated. But if the story becomes, "This man slaughtered his wife and 5 kids because he refused to let them live without him," then even men who are spiraling might hear that and feel, for a second, what it really is: selfish horror, cowardice with a gun. That framing can literally save lives. The Wilmington case, the Lupo case, forced Los Angeles to face something a lot of people didn't want to admit. These murders don't just happen. They are chosen. They are arranged. They are carried out step by step. And they are almost always about control. Control of money. Control of image. Control of the partner. Control of the children. Control of the ending. Let's talk about the house. What do you even do with a house where a father killed his entire family? Some neighbors said tear it down. Some said leave it empty. Others said sell it to someone new and move on because life has to keep going or else the tragedy keeps owning the block. There isn't a perfect answer. When something like this happens, the physical space becomes a scar. You can paint it, you can clean it, you can remodel it, but the address doesn't forget. For a long time, people in Wilmington drove past that house slower. They lowered their voices when they got near it. They pointed it out to relatives who visited, and you could see their faces change. You could feel the weight, because this wasn't a car crash. This wasn't a freak accident. This was a decision. And that is the last point that needs to be said out loud. When a father murders his whole family, people always go hunting for a single trigger. He lost his job. They were going through foreclosure. He was depressed. He snapped. It makes it feel smaller, like it can be contained, like you can say, if I just avoid that one trigger, I'm safe. But the truth is uglier. The trigger is not one event. The trigger is the belief. They belong to me. Their lives are mine to end. That's what happened in the Lupo family massacre. A man decided that if he couldn't keep his role, his image, his authority, nobody in that house would be allowed to survive him. He wrote his own justification. He blamed his employer. He blamed the system. He even blamed his wife. He tried to turn murder into mercy. Then he executed his entire family and staged their bodies to lock in his version of the ending. He thought he controlled the last word. He didn't. Because we're still here, saying the truth out loud. He wasn't a protector. He wasn't a martyr. He wasn't cornered by fate. He was the one holding the gun. And the only innocent people in that house were the ones who never got a chance to leave it. This is where we end the story. But for you, for the channel, you still have one job after a case like this. You say their names first. You say the victims first. You keep them human, and you keep the killer small. Brittany, Yasmin, Jassily, Benjamin, Christian, and Anna, they should have all still been here. The story should have just been a house with bikes in the driveway and twins yelling and a mom trying to get everyone out the door on time. That's the future that was stolen. If this breakdown hit you, the timeline, the motive, the control, and saying the victims' names first instead of letting the killer write the story, that's what we do here on the Witness Record. Every week we pull apart cases like this, not as tragedy porn, but as evidence of power, planning, and choice. So if you want the truth without the mythology, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the Witness Record, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part. Because here, we don't repeat their narrative, we expose it.